I noticed it first in the little things. The way she held her phone closer than before. The way she'd disappear into the bathroom for just a bit too long. Door locked. The sound of water running to muffle whatever she was doing. The way her laugh sounded different. Lighter. Detached. When she texted someone. A sound I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. But it wasn't just that. Lately, I'd been waking up to an empty bed more often than not. I'd find her, downstairs, sitting in the dim glow of her phone, her face blank, her eyes tired. I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd shrug, say she couldn't sleep. I believed her at first, because why wouldn't I? We had been through hell together, survived things that should have broken us. I had no reason to doubt her, or at least that's what I told myself. But the thing about doubt is that it doesn't need a reason. It just grows. Morning routine, or what's left of it. The kids were already halfway through breakfast when I walked into the kitchen. Cereal bowls, half-empty juice cups, and the faint smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. The usual chaos. "Hey," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. No response. My wife stood by the counter, her back to me, staring at her phone. I watched. Her for a second, waiting. "Morning," I tried again. This time, she glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, morning." She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, her hair still messy from sleep. On the surface, nothing seemed off, but when she put her phone down, she did it screen down. Subtle, but not subtle enough. I let it go. For now. The thing is, I'd been here before. 9 years ago, I'd found messages on her phone, flirty, too personal, the kind that made my stomach drop. She had sworn it was just an emotional thing, that nothing physical had happened. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it had nearly destroyed us. We went to counseling, talked about feelings I didn't even know I had, learned how I'd been emotionally absent, how she had felt invisible, and I tried. God, I tried, and for a while it worked. But the thing about broken trust is that it never really heals. It just scabs over, and all it takes is one wrong move to start bleeding again. Later that day, I found a receipt on the floor of her car. I had taken her keys to grab something from the trunk, and when I got in, there it was, folded up near the passenger seat. A hotel, a cheap one. Not the kind you book for a spa day. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she met a friend there for lunch. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't hers at all. But I didn't believe that. I could have confronted her right then. Walked back into the house, held it up, demanded answers. Instead, I put it in my pocket. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse she'd come up with. Maybe I wasn't ready for the truth. That night, after the kids were asleep, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A notification. And then, silence. I stepped out of the bathroom. She was in bed, phone in hand. But when she saw me, she quickly pressed the side button. Screen off. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one." I leaned against the door frame, watching her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You sure?" She let out a sharp breath, the kind she always did when she was annoyed. "Jesus, are we doing this again?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to be the kind of man who could let it go, who could trust his wife without question. But I wasn't that man anymore, and she wasn't the woman I had married. At 2 a.m., I woke up to an empty bed. Again. I found her downstairs, curled up on the couch, phone glowing in her hands. She didn't hear me come in. She was smiling, a small, private smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. She locked the screen, set the phone face down, and rubbed her eyes like she was exhausted. I stood there for a long time before I finally said, "Couldn't sleep?" She jumped, turning to me. "Shit, you scared me." "Sorry." I nodded at her phone. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." She stretched, forcing a yawn. "Just reading stuff. You know how my brain works at night?" "Yeah, I did. And I also knew that, whatever she had been reading, it wasn't a news article. The next morning, I got up early. She was still asleep, her phone on the nightstand. I could have looked, could have picked it up, unlocked it, and found the answers I didn't want. But I didn't, because here's the thing. Once you go looking for the truth, you can't unfind it, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what I'd see. Yet, I tried to let it go. For the next few days, I told myself I was overthinking things, that I was being paranoid, that maybe, just maybe, the weight of our history was making me see things that weren't there. But doubt doesn't just go away. It lingers, festers, digs in like a splinter you can't pull out. And it didn't take long for it to bleed into everything. I started paying closer attention. Not in an obvious way. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who hovered and interrogated and turned every little thing into an accusation. But I noticed things. The way she would close her phone a second too fast when I walked into the room. The way she left for errands and took longer than necessary, coming back with bags that didn't match the time she was gone, and the way she touched me, or rather, the way she didn't. We had never been the overly affectionate type, but now it felt different. Forced. Like she was keeping me at arm's length, only giving me just enough so I wouldn't start asking questions. Hated that I noticed it. Hated that I was even keeping track. But I couldn't help it. It was a Wednesday when I found out she was taking more than she was supposed to. She had a prescription, something she was supposed to take sparingly, but the last time she had an issue, I made a mental note of the pill count. Not on purpose, really. Just something I had been unconsciously doing since her addiction had first surfaced. Now the numbers weren't adding up. I counted again just to be sure. And then again. 6 pills missing in 3 days. That wasn't sparingly. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bottle in my hands. My pulse was heavy in my ears, an old familiar weight pressing down on my chest. I had been here before, and I had believed her when she said she wouldn't do this again. That night, after the kids were in bed, I finally brought it up. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, legs curled under her like she was completely relaxed, like everything was fine. I sat down beside her. "Hey," she glanced at me, distracted. "Hey," I hesitated. "I noticed your pills are going down fast." For a second, she didn't move. Then she sighed, putting her phone down. "Oh, come on, not this again." "Not what again?" She rolled her eyes. "Me being treated like some addict. Jesus, can I just take my medication without you counting every damn pill?" I took a breath. "I'm not treating you like an addict. I'm treating you like someone who has a history of, oh, so that's it? I screw up once, and now I can't take my own prescription without you hovering?" Once, like it had been a small thing, like it hadn't nearly torn us apart. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to make sure you're okay." "I am okay. You don't seem okay." Her jaw tightened. "Because I took my medicine? Because I'm watching you disappear again." That landed. For a second, I saw something flicker across her face, guilt maybe, but it was gone just as fast. She shook her head. "You're overreacting. I don't have a problem. And I really don't need you playing watchdog." I stared at her, waiting for something. An acknowledgement, a real answer, anything. But she just picked up her phone and turned back to the screen. Conversation over. A few nights later, she woke me up in the middle of the night. I blinked groggily at the clock, 2:47 a.m. "I fucked up," she whispered. I sat up instantly. "What happened?" She held up her phone. "I accidentally posted something on Instagram." I frowned, trying to shake off the sleep. "What do you mean?" "I didn't mean to. I was trying to check something on my camera, and I must have hit the wrong button." I reached for the phone, but she pulled it back. That small movement, that hesitation. "What was it?" I asked. She chewed her lip, looking everywhere but at me. "Just a bad angle. A bad angle." It wasn't the words themselves that got me. It was the way she said them, like she was constructing a lie in real time. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Who saw it?" "I don't know. I deleted it as soon as I noticed. I should have left it at that. Should have gone back to sleep, let it slide. But instead, I pushed." "Who did you ask to delete it?" That made her flinch. Her mouth opened, then closed. And right then, I knew. Not exactly what had happened. Not all the details, but enough. She wasn't telling me the whole truth, and we had been here before. The next morning, I checked our shared phone bill. Not to snoop, not to be paranoid, just to confirm. A number kept showing up, repeatedly, late at night, always deleted from her call history. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers clenched around the phone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was about to make a fool of myself, but I had ignored my gut once before. I wasn't about to do it again. That night, when the kids were asleep, I walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind me. She was already in bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a breath, and said, "Who is he?" She froze. For a long second, the only sound was the soft hum of the fan. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Are you serious?" I didn't say anything. Her fingers gripped the sheets. "You really think I'd do that to you? To our family?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But she hadn't asked me what I meant. She hadn't said, "Who is who?" She knew exactly what I was talking about. We argued. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just sharp words, clipped responses. She kept deflecting, turning it back on me, accusing me of being paranoid, controlling. But she never denied it outright. Not once. And that was enough. When she finally stormed out of the room, I didn't follow. I just sat there, staring at the bedroom door, feeling something inside me crack. Maybe it had been broken for a long time, but now I could finally hear it shatter. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the house, pipes settling, the wind against the windows, the occasional creak of the floorboards as she moved around downstairs. I half expected her to come back, to try and talk, to spin some excuse that I'd force myself to believe, but she didn't. And by morning, I knew something had changed. This wasn't just another fight. This was the beginning of the end. She barely spoke to me the next day. Everything was short, clipped, functional. She got the kids ready, made coffee, scrolled through her phone like nothing had happened, and maybe if I hadn't known better, I would have let myself believe that. But I did know better. I knew because of the way she avoided looking at me. I knew because she was still wearing yesterday's clothes, because she had never come back to bed. I knew because her phone was in her hand every second, like it was glued there. I knew because I checked the call logs again that morning. The number was still there, another late-night call, another conversation she hadn't wanted me to know about. And this time, I didn't hesitate. That night, when the kids were asleep, I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. She was in bed, curled up under the covers, her phone still in her hand. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a breath, and then calmly, I said, "I called him." She went still. The only movement was the slight tightening of her fingers around the phone. I wasn't lying. I had dialed the number earlier that day, let it ring just to see if anyone would pick up. A man had answered. I hadn't spoken, just listened for a second, then hung up. But that second had told me everything I needed to know. Her voice was tight when she finally spoke. "Who?" "The number. The one you've been calling late at night." She let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "Oh my God, you're insane," but her voice was shaking. "You can't even deny it, can you?" "Because there's nothing to deny." She sat up, her face flushed. "Jesus, do you hear yourself? You're acting like some jealous psycho." I checked the bill. "I know you're talking to someone." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "You went through my phone records? Like I was the one who had crossed the line, like I was the one who had broken something sacred." I let out a slow, bitter laugh. "That's what you're upset about?" She shook her head. "This isn't healthy." "No, it's not." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the way she was breathing fast, at the way she was gripping the sheets like she was holding on to something fragile. I had known her for 14 years. I had held her through labor, through sickness, through nights when she had broken down in my arms. I had seen every version of her, and I had never, not once, seen her look this guilty. Truth, or something close to it. "I'm not cheating on you," she said finally. I stared at her. She swallowed. "I mean, not physically." Something inside me cracked. "So it's emotional," I said, my voice hollow. She hesitated, and that was the worst part. Not the confession, not the words, but the hesitation. Because it meant she had thought about lying. It meant she had wanted to, and that told me everything. She started crying. I didn't move to comfort her. I just sat there numb as she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then tell me what it is." She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she just shook her head. I felt something deep in my chest. Anger, grief, exhaustion, curl in on itself. "I'm done," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Her head snapped up. "What?" "I can't do this anymore." Panic flashed across her face. "You don't mean that." "I do, and I did. I really, really did. She didn't leave that night, neither did I. We just sat there, both too exhausted to keep fighting, both too stubborn to be the first to walk away." Eventually, she turned off her phone and rolled onto her side, facing away from me. I lay down too, stared at the ceiling, listened to the sound of her breathing, and realized for the first time in 14 years that I didn't recognize the woman beside me anymore. The next morning, everything was different. Not in a dramatic way. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, no tearful confessions, just silence. She moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding my eyes, speaking only when necessary. The kids didn't seem to notice, too caught up in their morning routine. But I noticed, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was the beginning of the end. I waited until the kids were at school. She was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. I sat across from her, fingers laced together, heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said. She flinched. Just barely. Then she nodded. "Yeah, we do." But neither of us spoke. Because where do you even start when 14 years come crashing down in front of you? "I don't trust you anymore." I said it quietly, but the weight of the words hit like a hammer. Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "I know." That was it. No protest, no defense. Just, "I know." She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped. She wasn't fighting me anymore. Maybe she had finally accepted what I had already known for days. Maybe she had already made her decision. I exhaled. I can't live like this. Her lips trembled, but she pressed them into a thin line. "I love you," she whispered. "I felt nothing." "I know," I said. And that was the worst part. I believed her. She did love me. Just not enough. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that could fix this. We agreed not to tell the kids yet, not until we figured out the logistics, who would move out, how we'd split time with them. For now, we'd pretend. One last act before. The curtain closed. But I couldn't pretend. Not really. Because now, every moment felt like the last. The last time we'd sit together at the dinner table as a family. The last time I'd wake up to the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. The last time I'd watch her tie her hair up in front of the mirror, not realizing I was looking. It was unbearable. It was necessary. 2 nights later, she left. She said she was going to a friend's place, that she just needed space. She didn't say she'd be back. She didn't have to. I knew. She was already gone. Didn't call her. Didn't text. She didn't either. There were no long messages, no late-night confessions, just nothing. And maybe that was what hurt the most, because in the end, love doesn't die in a fire. It dies in silence.